Patreon.com/the Walk-Off Podcast. $4 a month gets you in there.
Is minor league spring training underway? Like, when are we going to see some of these guys that are getting some opportunity at big league camp kind of be relegated back to the affiliate spring training?
Yeah, pretty soon. I think these next couple of days we'll do some cuts. Cuts we use loosely in MLB. When's the last time a surprising cut happened? I don't know. But you'll start to see a bit more of that. At the Blue Jays complex, Field 1 and Field 2 are where the big leaguers take place. It's where I spend most of my time. But then there's a Field 3, 4, 5. There's backfields just full of 18-year-olds who, there's a blur of blue jerseys. All of them are hooked up to a million electronics now and everything. It's hard to pick apart who's who. But they are all there and going through their version of spring training. Eventually, they get into games against other clubs, minor league teams, especially something like the Phillies who are close by in Clearwater. But you'll start to see more of those, and you'll still see some of them over on the MLB side late in games, which is great. You see guys like Ricky Tiedemann. I think we saw some Gabriel Martinez recently, some of the top young guys, having a look at them in a real game. And I like it because it's at a real stadium where you can measure things. It's fun for me to go to a single A stadium and watch them, but I'm only so smart. I need some fancy numbers thrown at me, right? So you'll see a bit more of those, but those guys are starting to roll now.
So I know obviously you don't want to judge too much the first week of spring training games, but you've been down there in person. Have there been any performances that caught your eyes, like any off the radar guys that maybe are putting themselves on the radar?
Yeah, when you look through the guys like Tiedemann, Addison Barger are pretty high up there that people know about at this point. I think, Tiedemann being the obvious one. Barger is, I need to do a better job of reminding myself that some people have real lives and don't spend their entire brain on the Blue Jays. So, to the average fan, Barger is a new guy. I think you're going to see a lot of him this spring. Shortstop, third base, and the outfield, which will be a new wrinkle to this, and I think an important one. Beyond that, though, you're starting to see a lot of those younger mid-range prospects. A couple like Otto Lopez, seeing more and more of him. I think he's in that battle for that final spot on the roster. And seeing some of the late game prospects who could be something someday. I'm talking about guys like Desan Brown, the Canadian outfielder, who is just stupid fast. He is fast, 80 grade speed, as fast as it gets. Some of those young mid-range guys who eventually could come up, a Hagen Danner, Hayden Yinger, the right-hander as well. These relievers who could factor into it. It's sometimes a bit of an easier path for a reliever or a utility infielder ranked number 15 in the system because there's a lot of ways to get onto the roster. And I think the bullpen guys especially, because this is suddenly, thank God, a bullpen from the 20th century. For a long time, when we looked at the Blue Jays bullpen, it was, oh, wow, that guy throws 95. Great. That they did that in 1992. Around the league, every other team had 10 young guys throwing 100. Meanwhile, in Toronto, there was just Nate Pearson for a while, which completely fed into the hype and subsequent disappointment and the hype again, because Toronto fans were not used to seeing 100. That's why that excitement was there. Other teams have that in spades, but you're finally seeing, and this is a conscious change from the Blue Jays player development that I think is really going to pay off. Instead of just trying to create, a bunch of decent pitchers, they are chasing that top outcome now. They want strikeouts. They want velocity. If that means only a few guys work out instead of a dozen, fine. You can find back of the roster guys on waivers if you're a good front office, which the Blue Jays are. Player development, I think they're chasing that superstar now, which is good. You're seeing way more strikeouts from their prospects, much more velocity. And it's going to take a few years for that to show up in the big leagues. But when you're seeing with guys like Tiedemann, Yasser Zulueta is another one, of course, right up the top. You finally see a bullpen that looks like it belongs in this year of Major League Baseball, and there's way more potential in that bullpen already.
You kind of touched on it. This is the most depth we've kind of seen in this part of the Blue Jays game. You mentioned Hagen Danner. You mentioned Zulueta. Are there a couple other guys that, and we don't like to use the term injury, so we always use bad tacos, but bad tacos happen every single year. Are there guys within this minor league system that at some point are going to make their big league debut or get a sniff of the big leagues here? Obviously Nate Pearson and probably Hayden Younger, you said, right?
Yeah, you look at those guys are all in that group. I'm trying to think going a bit further down. You do run into, there's a bit of a group of lefties in there. You think of someone like Junior Fernandez. A lot of these guys,
Right.
forgetting Chad Green comes back eventually as well.
Right.
But it seems like even on the waiver wire ads this offseason, everybody throws 99 or they have a great splitter or there's at least something. And it's, when we talk about baseball, so much of a baseball front office and way too much of baseball media, this is my number one pet peeve with baseball coverage, is people trying to sound smarter than everybody else. It's an
Not here, buddy. Not on the walk-off.
Hey, thank God. And I'm a big believer that it's better for me just to know the numbers, but then tell a story instead of cramming data and charts down your throat. 7 people enjoy that. 99% of Blue Jays fans, which are like my mom and your uncles, they're thinking, shut up. Yeah. And I think that over like recent off seasons, you've seen a few intriguing additions, but this year, when you look at every single one, I don't need to get into how much their slider breaks and the tailing action on their fastball, blah, blah, blah. There's upside. In some sense, philosophically, big picture, which is what interests me because people understand it. Big picture, they're chasing upside and potential. And that's exciting because whenever one of these additions happens, of course, I see 10 Twitter threads about how this guy's going to be the next Mariano Rivera. Great. But when you look at it, I simplify it to quantity. It's not all about every one of these additions. Aha, there it is. There's how this is going to work out. Get 10 of them. If one works, cool. Easy. It's what the Blue Jays have done for years, looking for another outfielder like Jose Bautista. There's always been that toolsy guy. It was Derek Fisher. It was Bradley Zimmer. Who's that right fielder I'm forgetting who also struggled but was toolsy? But there's always been one guy they've been chasing. Eventually it works. Eventually you find Jose Bautista. Eventually you find a great reliever who was crappy for, up until he was 29, but all of a sudden he strikes guys out. So much of this is a game of just rolling the dice over and over. You just have to make sure it's a good dice, and their dice is much better now. They're rolling the dice on guys who throw 99. Most of them will flame out and keep being the guy they've been all along. But every once in a while, if you roll on upside, one of them will hit, and then you have a setup guy for free. And that's how you win. That's especially when you're up against a spending level like the Blue Jays are, you need to find that somewhere.
I love the way you just broke that down. Because that's the Rays to a T. Right?
Totally, exactly is the Rays, yeah. And like big brains go into it. Like there's smart people in those front offices who go into it. But it's just, I think we get way too fine and focused on these things. With every signing, I'll have people telling me, well, look at his changeup. It ranked in the 97th percentile. Cool. I didn't take math in school for a reason. That doesn't interest me. Tell me where the upside is. What's his story and where that's from? The Rays are a great example. They collect guys that no matter what have upside. They're not out here looking for a sinker baller who can maybe give them a 5 ERA in a spot start. Like they don't care about that. They are chasing the absolute top end every single time. A lot of the times it doesn't work. That's why they churn through 1,000 guys a year. But when it does work, that's why they're the Rays. That's why they're one of the best front offices in MLB.
And it's been exciting to see this front office take that philosophical change. Like obviously this front office isn't perfect, but you talk about it on a player standpoint, and obviously the best players are the guys who can acquire that experience and shift and change where it's needed. And it's good to see the front office kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, you need to chase that top end because if you are a good, confident front office, which the Blue Jays are, and listen, I haven't agreed with every move, but I think overall they've gotten this team to a pretty good place. Mm-hmm. And you can go out and find a number 7 or 8 starter, like a Drew Hutchison, like going down the list of who they have, Thomas Hatch, these guys through the organization. But it's about chasing the one that's going to be that free ace in the pocket, and from a team that's spending a lot of money already, being able to find that is pretty important. And the Blue Jays have done a great job, even in adding prospects in trades that have some upside. You even go back a while, a guy like Santiago Espinal, adding those younger prospects in trades, I think is a real strength of this front office. Even when you look at deals like the Randall Grichuk trade or the Mitch White trade, there's always a little prospect off to the side that a year later you're thinking, okay, like this trade was actually about this guy. It wasn't about this guy over here.
Yeah.
So it's a real strength of this team. And I think they're chasing that now. Certainly with their big moves, you go sign George Springer, you add big guys like that, you are chasing something big. But it's also a team that recognizes it's hard to make that jump from good to great. You're getting into a new tier where no longer is it just nice to make the playoffs. Like if they make the playoffs this year, for me, who cares? Like you better make the playoffs with this roster. You've got to win the wild card round. You've got to win the ALDS. Like that's when you enter the conversation of, okay, this is about what it should be. It's not about creeping into the playoffs and clapping your hands and participating anymore for the Blue Jays. They need to beat the Dodgers, beat the Astros. And you're only going to do that if you are big and aggressive. Sometimes that's going to mean missing, but so what? You've got to be aggressive.
I would be happy if the Blue Jays could beat any NL team in the playoffs.
Yeah.
For whatever that's worth.